So Katie, 6 years you've been doing this work. Tell us, how does it work? How many countries are you doing this polling in? What kind of questions are you asking?
Right, and we started off because we wanted to provide the world a voice for the world's 6 billion people. We wanted to create the largest global database of behavioral economic data so that leaders would have more than just traditional classic economic data like GDP, birth rates, death rates, but we wanted to provide for them what's on the hearts and minds of people around the world. And this is a 100-year commitment.
So how's the, 100 years?
Yes, 100 years.
Stop thinking about that for a minute. Well, I hope our children, grandchildren, et cetera, et cetera. But the point of the global women's polling is to get an index on a sort of foundation of data on how women feel about their own personal well-being right now. So
you can see right here, we cover 150 different countries with our world poll. So that's a representative sample of 95% of the globe. So some of the findings, so we interview 1,000 citizens in 150 different countries, and in the United States, we actually interview through the Gallup-Healthways Well-Being Index 1,000 people every day. And so that's 500 women. And some of our findings is that we have found that globally, women are more likely than men to be underemployed. Underemployment means you have a job, but maybe it's part-time, maybe you really want something a little bit better. So we find that women, 23% are underemployed versus men at 16%. We find that women tend to feel more negative emotion on a day-to-day basis. However, they have higher life evaluation and hope and positivity for the future. And in the United States, we find that women with children are less likely to feel well-rested than men. Probably not a surprise.
So far, none of this is surprising me.
Confirming what you know. And then women, we find experience more daily stress. Yet we still, when we go back to
no surprise there either.
Yes. And when we go back to resilience, that's what's interesting. Even though we experience more daily stress, we still see a life 5 years from now, we believe that it will get better. And we also noticed that women, single mothers, you know, they survive, you know, on much less than men do. And then significantly less women than men feel safe walking alone at night throughout communities across the country.
And that would be true around the world too.
Yes.
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 So we did ask a question before the conference began of our TEDx community. We asked them, on which step of the ladder would you say you personally feel your life is now? This is part of Gallup's Life Index. You want to explain how the question was asked and what the responses were?
And this is a terrific question because every language across every culture, they understand what a ladder is. And so this is Hadley Cantrell's Ladder of Life. So we're asking people, if you were to evaluate your life today on a ladder from 0 to 10, where would you place yourself? And then if you were to imagine your life 5 years from now, where would you place yourself? And what we found from the TEDxWomen's group that participated, we found that 63% of you are thriving. So that's really where we all want to be, where we're rating our lives now a 7 or above, and in the future it's an 8 or above. And if we compared it to the United States, it's actually 53.6% of the US population we find to be thriving. And when we compare men and women, we find that women overall tend to be thriving. And when we look at the suffering groups, we actually find that 1 percentage point of fewer women are actually suffering in the US. And then when we look at it globally, 23.9% of people around the world are thriving. So that is much, much lower than the 53% that we find in the United States and the 63% of thriving people within this group.
So the takeaway here is that the TED community is thriving. Or certainly feels they're thriving, yes. Which is all part of it, right?
Right.
In comparison to others. So question number 2 that we also asked of the TED community was, which of the following feelings did you experience a lot of yesterday? And they were given the choice: enjoyment, stress, happiness, worry, sadness, physical pain, or anger.
Yes, this is a group that had a lot of enjoyment yesterday. Your happy group, there is also some stress, but what was nice is that low percentage points of anger we saw within this community. And if we were to look at some of the countries around the world, we actually were able to pull out some of the countries that are a part of this today. And when we looked at Canada, 70% of women are thriving, versus only 10% of women in India are thriving on it overall. When we looked at China, 87% of women experience enjoyment versus only 51% of women in Turkey. When we looked at Spain, it has the highest percentage of women who experience physical pain and worry. And in South Africa, we actually found the lowest percentage of women who experience worry, sadness, stress, and anger. So South Africa seems to be a good place for low emotional, negative emotional feelings.
Those were the South Africans who were applauding. I can hear it. So why does this matter? And I think that this is the bigger picture for you, Katie, and for me too, is how do we put all this data into something that tells us, that gives us guides going forward for the lives of women and men?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that we have found is that when we look at career choices that people make, what careers have the highest well-being, we've actually found that entrepreneurs and business owners actually have the highest overall well-being. And when we look at women across the world and when we think about entrepreneurship, I mean, it seems as though a great investment that we could all make is in entrepreneurship and helping women and men to have their own businesses, providing them mentors. But I think really the key to this data is for leadership around the world to really have a better sense of what the day-to-day feelings of people are. Because if we're just looking at lagging economic data, it's old and it's not necessarily real time, and it's not about that state of mind of people.
So the Gallup organization and Paley are going to continue this polling and hopefully come up with some analysis and data that gives it meaning. We have a question we're going to ask now. This is going to be a live time question. We won't take the responses immediately because we want all of you, wherever you are, to have time to log in and do it however you're going to do it. But here's the question, and it's going to relate to some follow-up conversations on this stage. How many hours are you spending social time, with friends and family? And we're asking it, how many hours did you spend yesterday, just as a way to gauge this. You can include telephone, email, any kind of communication, although probably most of us are going to count the email time. And here's how you do it, the voting, so that are the responses, so that we can get them, and we will tally them up, and then we'll share those results at the beginning of session 2. Thank you, Katie.